accountant for a client who used that S3 platform. So I have that hands-on experience with the Lawson application, and now the implementation experience here with Cloudsuite Financials. So I put this presentation together to help show clients coming from S3 what are the major changes they're going to see when they move to Cloudsuite Financials. There are a lot of similarities between the two applications, but there are some major differences. And I think knowing those differences earlier on in the implementation is going to give you a big leg up on having a successful implementation, in making your team members aware of these changes, how they can tackle the changes, where the change requires a workaround, and where the changes may actually be better functionality than it was in S3. So I'm going to cover as much of that today as I can, and I will definitely leave time at the end of the presentation for Q&A. So for those of you on the call, if you have questions that I don't touch on, or you want me to get a little deeper into something from this presentation, definitely speak up at the end of the call. I'll try and leave some time at the end for that. So the biggest change, in my opinion, coming from S3 and moving to Cloudsuite is the navigation and just the overall look and feel of the system. And this is what you see. This is what you interact with every time you're in the system. So that makes sense, right? But from a navigation aspect, Infor has gone from kind of this form-based navigation where you guys are used to your form numbers and your flow charts in Lawson, to in Cloudsuite, a role-based way of navigating through the system. And what that means is you have to learn these roles, and you have to know what each role can do, assign those roles to your users, and then have them test out those roles. Does that give them all the navigation that they need to do their job? And we'll touch on a little bit later the security aspect of that, where you may need to modify a role that's delivered from Infor. But out of the box, you're going to have a bunch of roles. For example, you have a controller role, a staff accountant role, a chief financial officer role, a payables manager role. And each one of those roles is going to grant the user access to different screens, processes, and reports in the system. So a big part of testing in Cloudsuite Financials is one, figuring out what each of those roles can do, and two, what roles do your users need in the system. So to show you a little bit of what that looks like, when you log into the system, you're going to see a role switcher. And when you drop down on that, you'll see every role that's been assigned to you in the system. So this is your main way of navigating around Cloudsuite Financials. Once you're in the role, each role has its own drop downs for setup, as you see here on the right, processing, reporting, different utilities in each of the modules. And there's some overlap. For example, the staff accountant can do 90% of what the controller can do. And this drop-down menu is very similar, but the controller has some added functionality. They're able to do some things that the staff accountant can't. And there's a few tools in the application that are going to help you learn how to get to different screens and how to save those screens so that you can get back to them easily. You have a search bar in every role that you're in, and you can key in the field or the process that you're trying to get to. So for example, if I'm a staff accountant and I'm trying to find the post journal entries job, I could key in journal entry into the search, and it's going to pull up a list of all the screens related to doing journal entries. Then once I get to the screen, I can use the bookmark functionality and bookmark that screen, and it works just like a bookmark would in your internet browser. So you can save a list of all these bookmarks. You can save them and name them whatever you want. And you can even put your old Lawson S3 form number in there if that helps you remember what screen you're going to, at least to help you learn it. So that's a really helpful tool that we try to get our clients to use early on in the implementation. And moving forward, I want to show you a little bit about what the screens are going to look like in Cloudsuite Financials and how you use those screens. So on this page, we're looking at what's called a list view. And a list view is essentially a report of a data table in the application. And in Cloudsuite Financials, that data table is called a business class. So that's a key term here that's going to come up when we look at Infor Spreadsheet Designer, which is the replacement for Lawson add-ins. And it comes up in doing configurations and personalizations, which we're also going to touch on a little bit later in the presentation. So that business class name is very important. Here we're looking at an open requisition list view where requisition is the business class. And then this list view is delivered with the application and it's showing me all of my open requisitions. If I needed to get the business class name here, I would do Control Shift left click. So similar to your Control Shift O in S3. And that's what gives me that business class name, as well as the field name, some other field information like how big can this field be, alpha field, numeric field, all that kind of information. And these list views it's really embedded reporting. It gives you a lot of information and you can export these. And we're going to talk about that a little bit in reporting. It's something that Infor has really expanded in Cloudsuite Financial. You're going to see hundreds of these list views and point out some more examples a little bit later. But these are a great reporting tool. You're going to be able to dump these into Excel or create PDF documents out of them very quickly and easily. On the list view, you're going to have a toolbar. So this is going to be all your actions that are available on that particular list view. You can see I can open a record, create a new record, create from a template. And these are specific to this requisition list right here. The actions are going to be different if you were on invoices or journal entries or wherever you are in the system. So those toolbars are really where all your actions are being done in the system for creating new records. And then, of course, below that is the list. And we're also going to talk about how we can customize these lists, add fields, remove fields, resort these to give you meaningful reporting for your organization. If I were to open one of those requisition records from that list view, it's going to bring me into a form view of the requisition. So it's giving me more detail about that record. And you can see there's going to be additional tabs on the form where I would see the requisition lines, comments, any more detail about that record. So you're kind of drilling in to those lists to get the additional detail that you want. So rather than keying in another form number to jump to the next screen, you're using your mouse, you're clicking, you're really driving through the system to get all the information. And it's the kind of thing that you really get a feel for doing it hands-on. The more time that you and the users for your company spend in the system, the more comfortable you're going to become with it. It's definitely a little bit nerve-wracking at first. When you look at it, it looks very different than the old version, but I think it's pretty intuitive and you get pretty familiar with it pretty quickly. And there's definitely some advantages to the way that this is laid out. So personalizing and configuring screens is an important part in Cloudsuite Financials. If anyone on the call uses Smart Office in S3, you're probably familiar with being able to customize your screen. The personalization tool in Cloudsuite is very similar. It allows the user to remove fields and add related fields for that business class onto the screen. There's also a tool called Configuration Console, and it's more of an administrative level tool for like a business analyst or your IT department, where they can make customizations that are rolled out to all of the users. So a personalization is a change that a user makes that only they can see. A configuration is an administrative change that all of the users will then see when they get to that screen. So there's a couple points to make note of there. The first is that a configuration is not a change to the core code of the application. It sits on top of the code of the application. So you can always clear it and get rid of it. You're not changing the base code. You're just putting a layer on top of it to make a change. And then a personalization is a layer on top of the configuration. So if someone has made a configuration for everyone to see, a personalization will override that configuration. So that's important to keep note of. And how you roll out personalizations and configurations is going to depend on your organization, what your goals are, and what your administrative structure looks like. We recommend that during the course of an implementation, it's a good idea to give users the ability to do personalizations. It gets them familiar with what's possible, and it allows you to kind of group those together for your department and say, well, which of these personalizations make sense for us to roll out as a configuration? So then everyone has it. IT knows, okay, this configuration has been made to the application. We're able to kind of track it from that level. And you may or may not want to continue having users do personalizations, or maybe you just have your super users doing personalizations, folks. But it's definitely a key part of the implementation process because it's very powerful. You can make really big changes on the configuration side where you can even create new forms and new fields, and definitely make the reporting more tailored to your company and make those reports more meaningful. Another important piece of this process, we could spend a whole presentation on configurations, personalizations, but another key piece to think about is that these do override the delivered code from Infor. So if you move on to Cloudsuite Financials and you're a multi-tenant client, meaning that you sit on a server with other clients and Infor is pushing out code updates monthly, you're going to get that code when Infor delivers it. And that code is going to sit underneath any configurations or personalizations you have. So if they're delivering new functionality, you want to make sure that your configurations aren't going to mess with that. So that's where that administrative piece is really important in tracking what's out there in your system. Next, we'll talk about security, because this is another fundamental change between Cloudsuite and S3. In S3, again, you had your kind of form-based way of going through the system, and you assigned which users are able to see which forms. In Cloudsuite, as we talked about, it's role-based. It's which users have which roles. Now, this is a good thing in that Infor has delivered security for you out of the box. They've already said, the staff accountant can do these tasks and see these screens. The payables manager can do that. Excuse me. And those roles may work out of the box for your organization, or they may not. I don't think there was any way for Infor to deliver security out of the box that's going to work 100% of the time for 100% of the clients, and they know that. So there's ways to change the security behind these roles. But you need to think about this as early as possible before you go into the implementation. Is your organization one that is very strict with controls on what users can see and what processes they can or can't do? Obviously, the stricter your organization is, the more security you may need to change and put into place. So you want to make sure that you have time and resources dedicated to doing that. And you want to make sure that you're testing those security changes throughout the implementation. I've been on multiple implementations where the client is making security changes up to go live and after go live, where they're probably not testing the impact of those security changes before they put them in place. So you absolutely want to make your security changes as early in the game as possible. Identify where do you have overlap, where do you have someone able to access a screen they shouldn't. Identify it, make the change, and test it during your testing cycles. Next, I'm going to talk about exporting from Print Manager. This seems like a smaller change between the two systems, but it's a very important change to point out in that if you don't know about this this aspect, you may be sitting there at go live trying to run reports and being very frustrated that you're having to run them multiple times. Because in the S3 functionality from the Print Manager, I could take a report and I could generate a CSV or a PDF right from my Print Manager. In Cloudsuite, it's a little different in that you determine the output before you run the job. Now, I don't want to say out of the box, but if you don't do a report distribution group, you're going to have to choose. Do I want an Excel copy, CSV copy, or a PDF copy? You're only going to have one option unless you do report distribution groups. These are going to allow you to export your jobs and your reports in multiple formats at one time. So when you run the job or the report, you're going to put on a report distribution group that's going to say, I want this to do Excel and PDF. And you can also add multiple users to the distribution group. So you could say, I want this report to run in Excel and PDF, and I want it sent to the entire accounting team. Now, only one person needs to run that job, and all of the users are going to get that report, for all the users who need to get that report. So again, just another one of those little pieces that if you do early in your implementation and have these all built prior to go live, you're going to have a smoother go live. And you're going to save some time in that first month where you're trying to figure out, how do I get this in Excel and PDF? I want this report sent to the payables manager. You can have all of that built ahead of time. And reporting. Imagine this is what everyone's desk looks like who's working from home right now. Past 6 months now. That's what mine's like. Reporting is a crucial piece, right? On the GL side, that's kind of the name of the game. That's what we're trying to do is get our GL reports out. And in S3, we have the RW100 tool for creating standardized reports in Lawson. We don't have the RW100 exactly in Cloudsuite Financials, but we have multiple options to replace that functionality. Out of the box, kind of whatever you buy from Infor, you're going to have this BI, business intelligence, FSM, financial supply management application. And that's going to house your core financial reports, your trial balance sheet, as well as budget versus actual and a handful of other reports that they give you. They're also going to give you this Burst, which is another BI application, which comes with a bunch of other delivered reports. And that's great. And they're good reports. And there's a lot of reporting that comes out of the box. What you need to decide as an organization is if we want to create new reports and we want to modify the reports that were delivered. How are we going to do that? So in the BIFSM application, there's a tool called Application Studio, which allows you to create reports and allows you to modify reports. And if you're going to go down that road, you likely want to have someone in your organization trained on how to do that. It's a little bit different than RW100. It's more capable in what it can do, but it's also not as easy to pick up and just kind of learn yourself. So that's something to consider. Same thing with Burst. Burst is its own BI platform that you could have users, people in your IT trained on how to do it, and you can create great reporting with it. You want to get those reports figured out, early in the project. How are we going to get these reports out? Or maybe you're using a third-party platform. You have a Kaufman Hall, a Tableau, a Crystal Reports, or you do your own SQL reporting in-house, whatever the case may be. You want to figure out what is the path that you're going down and stick to it early on and put your resources behind that. And it's difficult because it's hard from a demo maybe to guess, well, what's going to be the right one for our organization. But you really want to ask those questions up front, and you want to know what path your organization is going to go down for reporting. And back to list views. So this is functionality that we really didn't have much of in S3, and these are everywhere in Cloudsuite. And I really encourage my clients to use these whenever possible, because these can be exported to Excel very quickly, much quicker than a query would run, and you don't have to build it. It's already in the system. It's delivered. You go under your options, under those three dots, if you can see on the screen here, and you tell it export to CSV, and it goes right to your print manager, and you've got a report of your GL transactions, your GL totals, your open invoices, your invoice aging, asset additions. There's literally hundreds and hundreds of these throughout the application. And you don't want to reinvent the wheel by creating a bunch of queries for things that are already available to you in the system. And remember, these can be modified. You can add fields to these. You can resort them. All of that stuff, you want to become proficient at in your testing cycle, so that when you're in your first month and you're doing some ad hoc reporting, oh, I know I can get right to this GL transaction screen. I can run a few search parameters, dump that to Excel, and I've got all the GL transactions I need to do my ad hoc analysis. I don't need to run a query. I don't need to have a report built or anything like that. I think these are a key piece to reporting in Cloudsuite Financials. And the last piece of reporting is home pages. And so again, out of the box, Infor is going to deliver kind of the landing page for when I open my payables manager role. I'm going to be greeted with a number of analytical reports here and links to commonly used screens like invoice aging and overdue invoices. And these can be modified as well. So if the home page is something that's important to your users or your department, you want to make sure you have someone in your organization who learns how to modify these home pages. These are a great way for, especially at the management level and the CFO level, where they can get into the application and right from their home page, they have at their fingertips, their key reports and the key screens that they want to get to. And I'm going to touch briefly on queries and uploads, kind of alluded to this earlier. For those of you on the call used to Lawson add-ins, it's been replaced by Infor Spreadsheet Designer. The functionality is essentially the same in what it can do. It can query data out of the system and upload data into the system. But I think they've made a few functionality changes to really make it more efficient and to make it easier for users to learn. So the first part of doing a query or an upload is you got to know the business class, which goes back to earlier when we were looking at those screens. Once you have that business class name, you can paste that into your query or upload or key it in. You don't have to go find the data table from a list. All you need is that business class name. And once that's in there, you're going to see all of the related fields that you can pick and choose what you want to query out. And then when you turn that into an upload, to upload records into the system, you no longer need to manually map the column. So I don't have to say column 1 is company, column 2 is accounting, column 3 is account, and all that. The spreadsheet designer tool will do that automatically. It's going to look at the name in the row 1, and it's going to automatically map it for you. So it's going to save you a lot of time on uploads. The other functionality piece they've done is you can now save the upload and queries directly in the Excel workbook. So I don't have to save it as a separate file somewhere on a shared drive. Once that workbook is saved, it's got the upload and query in it. I can rerun it. I can send it to another user. And as long as they have a valid login to Cloudsuite and the right security to see the records for that upload and query, they'll be able to log in and they can run the query or the upload that I created. So another very powerful tool, if you're used to add-ins, it can do all the same things that it did before, but I think it's actually a little bit easier for users to learn. Next, I'm going to talk about transaction analysis, and this is for those of you used to your GL90 and GL95 screens. Everyone in accounting, I'm sure, is used to running hundreds of these every month end, right? So the first thing we've seen upgrade clients notice is there's no GL90, there's no GL95. Well, there's no tool called a GL90 or a GL95, but there's a tool called account analysis, which is essentially going to give you the same information. It's just run a little bit different and it looks a little bit different. So kind of similar to filling out your GL95 information, you're going to fill out the parameters that you want to run to get your GL transaction analysis data. And you can see here, I've keyed in an account number, a GL account number, but that could also be a summary account. So I could be pulling an entire income statement worth of accounts, or maybe just my revenue accounts, or whatever summary within the chart of accounts I want to see. And same thing with the accounting unit side. I could look at all my accounting units, one accounting unit, or a summary of accounting units. And when I run the report, it's going to pull up the activity balance, GL balance, for whatever period of time I've selected, along with the beginning balance and ending balance. Now, your next question is probably, okay, but how do I see the transaction detail that makes up that activity? Well, the activity is going to be a hyperlink. You can see how it's blue and underlined there. So when you click on that, it's going to bring you to the GL total detail and the GL transaction detail that make up that amount. So you can see it's giving you the same information as a GL90. It's just giving it to you in a different way, and you're drilling in to get to the transaction detail. I think that was just an important tool for every user in S3. So we wanted to point out where that functionality resides in Cloudsuite. The next big change is budgets. Again, it's kind of a rewrite in how they store budgets and how you change budget information in the system. And this is the kind of the budget detail that you load for reporting purposes. This is not like the DPM budgeting tool. This would be how you store your operating budget, your capital budget, maybe a forecast, things like that. What you used to store on FB20 screens in S3. And once those were loaded, you were able to modify kind of right on the screen there. It's a little bit different. The budgets are now stored in what's called scenarios. And when you import your budget data, you then run an action to load that budget data, and it's locked in to your budget data. So then in order to make changes, you would either do an additional import, something called a change request, or something called a quick change. And we're going to walk through those. It sounds like they're kind of adding a step, but the thing you get out of that is that the system is now tracking all of your budget changes for you. And you'll see when we get to the change request, you're also able to route the change request through an approval process. So if you wanted to have someone send out a budget change, they could do it through the system. Wouldn't have to go through emails or anything like that. So here are the budget imports we were talking about. Really just want to show you that the budget imports load to this import tab, and then you run the action start incremental load to get your budget into the data where it then becomes reportable. And then the change request is a different functionality where you would load the change you want to make to the budget, and then again, run it through an action to load it into the budget data. And that allows you to track the change, allows the system to track the change. And it allows you to route the change for approval if you decide to do so. And that is a delivered flow. So you don't have to create anything custom. You just have to create what's called approval codes to decide who needs to approve that budget change. And then the system will route the change to that user to either approve or reject. If they approve it, it can be loaded to the budget data. If they reject, it cannot. The other way to make a budget change is through a quick change. And this is just a quick way to move a budget amount from one GL location to another, or from one GL period to another, without having to do that change request action. And one more thing I want to point out on budgets, I'm going to go back to the budget import. If you look on the screen at this budget import line, you can see it's got the GL location, the accounting entity, accounting unit account, then the budget period and amount. So each line is going to represent one budget period. I know, in the old version or in a lot of other budgeting tools, you might see columns for each budget period where you would budget periods 1 through 12 on one row. It's flipped now, right? So each row represents its own period. And I point that out because during the course of an implementation, obviously we're going to convert your budget data. And part of that is going to be maybe having to change the way you do your budgets in Excel, if you're doing them in Excel, or through whatever other tool you're exporting them. Just keep in mind, you're not having a budget period 1 through 12 in your columns. You're having them as rows in the upload. Just something to point out there. The last piece I'm going to touch on is activity management, or project management, as it's called in Cloudsuite financials. So if any of you are using activity management in Lawson, you kind of know what it's for. For those of you who don't, it's a way of tracking project spend, typically capital projects. It could also be grants, marketing initiatives. You could be tracking spend for natural disasters like tornadoes or hurricanes, or we have a lot of clients who are using projects to track COVID spend. Essentially, what you're doing is you're defining project numbers that you then assign to GL transactions so that you have a way to track all the spend related to a particular project. And there's a lot more functionality that goes into the project module. We actually have a whole nother presentation on that that I think is coming up in a couple weeks here. But I put it into this changes presentation because projects is really now tied to the hip with GL. In S3, it was a separate module. It required separate setup and separate processing. And they've gotten rid of a lot of that by tying it to GL. So the setup is very easy. The maintenance is very easy. And I know that I really encourage any clients who weren't using activities to use projects when they move to Cloudsuite Financials, even if it's just for kind of a trial run and how it works. And I think most clients find that it's very easy to maintain and they really like what's delivered. And there are quite a few delivered reports with the project management module that give you some really nice reporting out of the box. That is everything that I wanted to cover on the major changes between S3 and Cloudsuite Financials. So I want to open up the discussion now to anyone on the call who has any questions. Is anyone looking at upgrading and kind of wondering what they should look out for? Any questions came into this with?
No questions in the chat.
Okay, thank you, Kelly.
You're welcome, Steve.
Okay. If anyone thinks of one, go ahead and shout one out here. I'm just going to go through these last couple slides. If you decide that you do have a question or you think of something after this call is done, you can reach out to our business development team. Here's the number and the email for that. So we definitely encourage you to do so. I'd be happy to answer any questions you guys have. And we also, if you check out our website, balesllc.com, and you go to the Reach Us, we're offering a Coffee with Consultants program. So if you have a question, you want to talk through something one-on-one with myself or another application consultant, we'll give you a meeting of time and talk through whatever your question is. So if you'd rather do it that way, I'd absolutely encourage you to do so. And that is everything I had for today. So give another little minute here if anyone's thought of any questions. And if not, I think we can wrap up for the day.
No questions in the chat yet, Steve.
All right. Well, take care, everyone. And remember, just hop onto our website, reach out to us if you guys have any questions on an implementation that comes up. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks, everybody, for attending. It's greatly appreciated. Have a great rest of your Friday and a phenomenal weekend.
Yeah, thank you, guys.